So we have been having some really interesting, not just insights, but some very good ideas in terms of how we can grow as small states to develop a really strong and sustainable future for our region. And so I thought that this particular panel will demonstrate how real that is, that it's possible, that there's so many wonderful things that we can do. And therefore, Dereck, I'm going to introduce you as moderator and then hand over to you to introduce your panelists, just very briefly, okay? Because we did put the full profiles in the chat for everyone to see. So Dereck Rajack is the Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Information and Credit Rating Services Limited, CARICRIS. He is a highly experienced risk management professional, having served for over 20 years in the financial services sector of the Caribbean. He has 15 years in executive and senior leadership roles, leading teams of professionals with varying technical and cultural backgrounds across multiple territories. Dereck is someone who has been very closely associated with us here at CCGI, and we would be even deepening those connections further as we move into the new year. Dereck, it is my pleasure to welcome you and to hand over this panel discussion to you.
Thank you, Kamala, and good afternoon again, everyone. So this will be a very interesting discussion. Kamala, you said yesterday in one of the comments on LinkedIn that excellence should be our mark in all things, right? And I'll add to that that in the Caribbean, excellence shouldn't just be a goal, but it's our pathway to sustainability. So I think the topic is very relevant to us in the Caribbean. As we know, financial institutions are important enablers and facilitators of economic activity. And it's one of the areas that we can really focus on to develop ourselves and grow. So I'll quickly introduce our very esteemed panel. We have Ms. Karina Johnson from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB. And Karina is the Central Bank Digital Currency Project Specialist for the ECCB and was the project manager for the ECCB's Central Bank Digital Currency, the pilot called DCash. So that should be very interesting to hear about some of that experience. And just briefly, she's an attorney at law in the Eastern Caribbean, and she engages in advocacy in both civil and criminal jurisdictions, and with both in the private and public sector in the intersection of law, finance, academia, and technology. So that's a brief introduction to Karina, and the full bio is what is online and was shared. Then we have Dr. Anne Crick, Senior Lecturer and former Head of Department of Management Studies and Center for Hospitality and Tourism Management, located in the Bahamas, former Associate Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences and former Head of Behavioral Science and General Management Unit at the Mona School of Business and Management. I mean, I know Anne very well, and her list of accolades are very long, but we'll say that Dr. Anne Crick is an active researcher, and she has more than 20 books and chapters and articles in her field of work, and has done many of these presentations locally and overseas. And she's currently a director at JMB and chairs their corporate governance subcommittee. And then we have Mr. Michael Oderson, Chief Product Officer at Ingenuity and Chief Operating Officer at Crafted. And Michael is an accomplished executive with over 15 years experience driving growth in the technology industry. And he is formally trained in computer science and specializes in the implementation of technology solutions and management of digital projects. So we have, as you've said, Kamala, we have a very interesting panel here today, different fields. And I think we'll have a lot of overlap from some of the conversations that we had previously. Some of the themes would definitely apply to financial services. So I will just hand over now. Maybe we'll start with Karina to give us, some opening remarks and share some of her experiences at the ECCB and with the digital Dcash project, etc.
Great. Thank you, Dereck, and good afternoon once again. Thank you, Kamala and team, for inviting the ECCB to participate in the 5th Global Conference, and particularly this conversation. I think the timing of our particular topic, creating cultures of excellence in the financial sector, is timely, given where we are today, the significance of today being the US elections and the uncertainty around the outcome. I think it kind of pushes into stark relief so much of the unpredictability of the global landscape at present. And it reaffirms how important it is for us to do what we do within the Caribbean in the areas that are within our control, or to the extent that they are within our control, to do them with the intent and expectation that they should have impact. So that leads me to the definition that I am working with today in respect of that culture of excellence. I think at a technical level, a culture of excellence, I think, is defined as, optimizing processes for more efficient output. I think moving beyond that, especially in the context of where we are as the ECCU region, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, we have to move beyond such a narrow definition if we are to achieve intentionally outputs that can have significant impact on the day-to-day lives of the people we serve. And that's the core of our mission as a central bank, right? Not only are we stewards of our financial system here in the ECCU, but we are responsible for the financial welfare of the people we serve here in the region. And so in this regard, for the ECCB as a central bank, we see a culture of excellence being a broad part of this mandate in a number of ways. Four facets that I'll speak on briefly. Internally for us, it means that we ourselves, we must position our strategic initiatives. They must be aligned with that vision. And we must ensure that our activities are geared towards us, one, continually realizing that vision, but two, changing, pivoting as necessary. Beyond that, externally, we have recently at our 40th anniversary celebrations issued what we refer to as the Big Push Challenge to our governments of the ECCU. And that Big Push Challenge, again, is a call to considering and moving towards impactful outcomes, yes? With that Big Push Challenge, we have called out our governments to double the GDP of the respective economies in 10 years' time. And so this, again, invites our governments to creatively consider how we can achieve economic growth as well as sustainability. Beyond this, our role as central bank is also to be facilitative. And one of the major ways that we've done this is through initiatives such as Dcash, our central bank digital currency, the pilot for which we wrapped up in January of this year. The intent behind Dcash was to provide a digital public infrastructure via which we could, one, increase the efficiency of our payment system, two, work with our businesses throughout the ECCU, our MSMEs, our larger corporate bodies, to help to increase business resiliency and competitiveness. And as importantly to us, the third major objective that we undertook with that pilot was financial inclusion. And again, it ties back to our mindset in terms of continuing to pursue that culture of excellence. It means that we have to not only protect what we have, protect the financial system, but ensure that we are expanding our reach to serve those who are in need. So financial inclusion, one of the key objectives that we pursued with the Dcash pilot, it saw us for the first time offering a pathway for participation in the financial system to persons who may not necessarily have held bank accounts, met the requirements to open a bank account. And so we provided digital wallets that allowed for transactions peer-to-peer, for purchases, etc., to such persons. So I believe I am close to the limits of my time, but just in opening, we do recognize that a call to excellence is not just one that, you make and you expect that, okay, the constituents that you serve, the other stakeholders, is one that we see ourselves as pivotal in leading and in modeling by our actions.
All right, thank you for that, Karina, and some interesting points there. And maybe later we could follow up a little bit more on the financial inclusion aspect of it to see how that has been going. So I'll ask Dr. Anne Crick to go next. So Anne, over to you.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon to everyone from very rainy Jamaica. It is my pleasure really to speak about two of my passions, which would be service excellence and also to talk about Jamaica Money Market Brokers, where you heard that I was a director. So I want to use JMMB as a case study, but before that, I wanted to make some general points about the financial sector. First of all, the most general point, service excellence in our region is very sporadic, unfortunately. Or I should say hit and miss. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's awful. So that is the first challenge we face. We do not generally have a culture of excellent service sector. When it comes to service excellence, when it comes to our sector, what we face is that there are a lot of government requirements, and that is because, of course, we have to ensure that we are seen as robust within the global financial sector. But that, from the perspective of our consumer, I think we can all agree, seems like a hurdle. You have to produce this form of documentation, you have to constantly certify, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be annoying. And even though it's not the fault of the service, the company, the bank, or whatever, the insurance agency, it may be seen as an obstacle. Also, the increasing number of cyber crimes and the amount of fraud means that we're putting even more regulations, more obstacles, if you want to think of it that way, for the customer. How do you maintain that relationship? And when things go wrong, I'm thinking of a particular situation that happened last week in Jamaica, where there seemed to have been some evidence of fraud. I don't understand the circumstances, but the bank's name was pulled into disrepute, therefore disrupting the concept of service excellence. What do we do? How do we produce service excellence within the financial sector, considering all that I have mentioned? Because simply putting out a slogan that, we're number one, you come first, that's not enough. In fact, we can set ourselves up for failure if we do that, because people are then saying, okay, you promised this, and this is what I receive. So that's a challenge. So I've given you a bunch of bad news. Let me tell you the good news. If we can nail this, we can actually create a source of competitive advantage that is going to make our financial institutions superior to the rest of them. Because we understand that there is a limited range of what we can do, say, with interest rates, or even the products and services that we come out with, those can be easily remedied. So that was just my intro. Let me just give a couple definitions of service excellence. Service excellence refers to the ability of service providers to consistently meet and occasionally even exceed customer expectations. So that's a kind of nice baseline one. But I wanted to give you another one, which is where I think many financial service firms want to be. Customer excellence is a practice of consistently exceeding customer expectations. So you see the difference. One was occasionally, this is consistently. It's not just about meeting needs, it's about surpassing them in ways that leave a lasting positive impression. Customer service excellence is proactive, anticipating what customers might need or even once before they realize it themselves. So that is setting the bar really high. How can it be done? So in about 4 or so minutes, I want to talk about Jamaica money market brokers, how they have done it, and then we can use that as a jumping off point for other organizations. Without vision, the people perish. That's biblical, and it's also something we have in our Jamaica national anthem. Well, 31 years ago, a lady called Joan Duncan started Jamaica money market brokers out of a dream. She had this big dream, and she had the dream where any Jamaican could walk in off the street, take a few $100s from their pocket, and invest it. And when they did, they would be greeted by staff who believed in respect and love. Every company starts with a dream. We have to understand what that dream is and expand on it. So it's not just enough to have it, you must instill it. Joan sadly passed after a few years after she started the company. But before that, she started a movement and she had advocates, what some research writers would refer to as raving fans. Service excellence can never be about one person. The vision must be passed on to others. And one of the things I was thinking about, it cannot just be at the superficial level. You know, you hear little slogans and so on. It must be at the cellular level where you actually feed it in your bones. So how does GMMB make sure that happens? They actually embed it in something called the vision of love. The vision of love is a long document that you can go and look at on your own time. But the important thing, it was created by about 130 employees. Pretty much every employee was working with the company at the time. And it spells out the interactions between service employees, who we call team members at GMMB, and each other, between them, and then to the public as well. So the larger point I want you to understand is that if we don't get it right internally, if people aren't connected internally, if they're not giving each other service excellence, it's pretty much impossible for that to happen outside. And there's a bunch of academic research that I won't bore you with that really speaks to that. So you really want to have something somewhere documented that embeds that for people. Another important point GMMB does, you hire for fit. So it's a really tight labor market now. We understand that. And there is a temptation to just hire people with technical skills. But at GMMB, one of the things that we really focus on, psychometric testing to see, are you a fit with the culture? Because we can teach people skills, we can send them on training, but you cannot essentially change somebody's character, their personality. These things are fixed by the time you have an adult. So you really want to hire people who are going to live that for you and not try to, as you would think of it, fit a square peg into a round hole. Then socialization is very important. If you have a particular level of service excellence, you must tell people what that is. So in independent research, I found that often leaders had an idea of what service excellence is, and then they never pass that on. GMMB doesn't take that chance. There's a 2-day training session called the GMMB Way, which really every single person has to go through, including board directors. And it tells them what is it that GMMB stands for in terms of the vision of love, internal and external service excellence. And then that is reinforced regularly. You must measure. Having a dream and not checking whether that dream is being lived is very important. So one of the things that JMMB did was to enroll in a program called Great Places to Work. And Great Places to Work is an international program, and then we measure it at the regional level. And it's independent, but what it does, it sets you targets that you can look at. You can see how well are we doing. So I'm proud to say that the Dominican Republican branch, because we're now in 4 countries across the region, was number 3 in the region as a great place to work. Wherever you fall, it's important to measure so you know what you need to change on. And of course, getting feedback from your customers directly, your clients directly is very, very important. So as I wrap, I just want to highlight a couple points that I think I mentioned, but I want to reinforce. from the board level, we have to monitor that. If we're not monitoring it, then we're falling down on our job. So we need to understand the vision and we need to monitor it. The vision must be more than a slogan. Occasionally, we need to go in and test. So that's what several of us do. We go in branch and then we come back with feedback. And of course, living in a small country, people are always saying it to you. And finally, it must be drilled down to every level. Your board of directors must believe it. Your team leads must believe it. Your team members must believe it. So I'm going to leave it right there and be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you for that, and we'll take some thoughts from Michael, and then we'll come back and expand on some of the points that everyone would have made.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dereck. Good to see you again. So I'll just touch quickly on what we've been doing at Ingenuity. So as Chief Product Officer with Ingenuity, we've worked quite closely with TSTT on the delivery of their mobile wallet, which is a platform called Paper. And before we even got to the point of building the platform, we did a lot of research in terms of the attendant benefits of going this route. And one of the biggest benefits is we've seen less cash equal less crime. And as we all know, we've been seeing very, very bad crime problem across Trinidad and even some of the other islands. It's been getting worse and worse. And we firmly believe that with the reduction of cash, we will see significant reduction in crime. I think we can all agree that, carrying around large amounts of cash could be a nuisance. And it's also a pain point when you get to the point of sale and, you want to purchase, but you actually don't have any cash with you, right? And what we've also seen with the adoption of these types of platforms, mobile money, e-wallet platforms, they go by a few different names, but by and large, it's digital financial services. One of the biggest benefits, one of the biggest positives has been serving and providing inclusion for the unbanked and the underbanked. When people think of the unbanked and the underbanked, you tend to think of, man on the street without a bank account. But actually, Trinidad and Tobago has upwards of 50,000 unregistered SMEs. And we've seen trade popping up on Facebook, on Instagram, where people meet, they pass cash, exchange for goods. So that's all happening outside of the traditional financial sector. And again, platforms like these then bring this type of trade into the financial sector. Another major benefit can be the help with cross-border money movement, Forex issues that the country has experienced, and even, layering transparency on top of financial transactions. Platforms like these are not without its challenges. So I know the previous panel touched heavily on cybersecurity. So it's a big cybersecurity consideration in implementing these payment channels, but we should have a global mindset in terms of the types of platforms that we implement. The best practices are available. Same best practices that are adopted globally can be brought to bear across the Caribbean. Additionally, education of the end users so that they understand the benefits of these channels. And then there are other challenges that we have to surmount, such as, sharing of KYC data, regulatory requirements and reporting for these platforms, and also the protection of data. But all in all, I think there's a lot of benefit that can be seen once we implement these platforms properly.
All right, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Michael. So, so there were some common themes across all the comments. And maybe I could start off by asking one that I think is important for us. You mentioned it, Michael, that there's a significant population that are either underbanked or unbanked. I think other speakers, Karina may have mentioned it as well. How do we get to a state of, and how do these elements that you guys are talking about, whether it be digital currencies, technology, help with getting more people into the financial system?
Yeah, so if I were to take that one, one of the ways, and kudos to the central bank for implementing this. We actually have multiple wallet tiers. So there's relaxed KYC depending on the size of your wallet. So it's something that we have implemented into our platform. So if you come in at the lowest wallet size, somewhere between 5,000 to 7,000 a month, you would actually be able to sign up without providing full KYC documentation. And as the value goes up, the more you essentially want to transact, it's the more documentation you provide. So it can go up to a middle tier of providing a utility bill or an ID, etc. And this sort of stratification aids with bringing the financially excluded, because a lot of times the challenges with them having either the proper documentation, they may move around a lot, they may not have fixed place of abode, etc. But the control has to be there on the platform to limit the spend as well. So that's one way that it can be done.
Hi, and just to add, I think one of the starting points, while we often talk about the unbanked and the underbanked, one of the starting points is that people don't necessarily want to be excluded from the financial system. There are a lot of barriers that have resulted in this. The regulatory requirements make it difficult. So as a central bank, especially doing Dcash as a CBDC, it puts us in an interesting position. We both are the regulators, and so we need to have those KYC requirements met. But we also are concerned to ensure that persons can access our financial system through platforms such as Dcash. So I think we have a unique vantage point. One of the things that we have embraced as a challenge is how can we responsibly extend access to our financial system, yeah? And when we think of this, when we think of the underbanked, it's not necessarily just bad actors, nefarious characters. You have young persons who are just entering the world of work, who may not necessarily have that job letter, who may not necessarily meet the formal requirements for proof of address, persons who are moving throughout the Caribbean, who are itinerant, etc. So you have legitimate cases, and it bears emphasizing that when you work to address financial inclusion, it's not necessarily that you're weakening your financial system. If we are intent on putting our economies to use, for the widest cross-section except bad actors, then we have to look at that. And so when we did it with Dcash, similar to Michael's approach, we took a tiered approach, lowering some of the due diligence requirements, correlating to the thresholds for transactions. So for instance, as practical as possible, with one class of wallets that we offered during the pilot, a person could simply submit a selfie of themselves, as well as one piece of valid government-issued ID. So basically 2 pieces of information, and that would give them access to a transactional wallet. Of course, we had a correlative limit on how much in terms of your monthly transaction value that you had access to via that wallet. So it is something of a trade-off there. In addition to this, the CCB has also embarked, and we're happy to disclose that basic transaction wallets are now being offered. They're being piloted by at least 2 of our regional banks at present. And these basic transaction wallets, they result from an approach of simplified due diligence. And again, the idea is to meet people where they are, ensure that, the widest cross-section can access without these hurdles that we have seen in place prior that would have perhaps resulted in youngsters, persons who perhaps participate primarily in our informal economies, etc., being excluded. So there is merit to, working with your regulator, and your regulator working with our licensed financial institutions to extend access to our financial sector.
Thanks for that. Just going back to something Anne had focused on a little.
If I may just come in for
Yeah,
one.
sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
And we lost her for a bit, but I know it's because there's a storm that's happening. Actually, there's heavy rains and thunder even in Trinidad and Tobago right now. But so we had lost Anne there. So she is back with us. And I'm so thankful because I was just going to ask everyone here today to pray for Jamaica because we don't want anything bad to happen to you guys at all, But okay, so I'm glad you're back. Dereck, I'll hand back over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Kamala. So Anne, I was just looking for you. Also having worked at GMB in the past, you mentioned something that was interesting. A word that doesn't usually go well with financial or doesn't get associated with financial institutions, which is love, right? So how does, how has that worked for GMB in terms of incorporating this culture of love into something like financial services?
Okay, thanks for that question. Apologies, everyone, for having missed out a part of it. Yes, love and finance seem to be very strange bedfellows, but when you recognize that the idea is the way in which you actually deliver the service. So you can deliver even bad news, you need to bring more paperwork, more documentation in a way that honors the person. So it is the process. And it is a matter, it is, as you know, Dereck, it is from the top coming right down. So this interaction between individuals, that's why I highlighted earlier, that it's really important that the team workers work as a team and they feel it, that they feel that their team leaders really care about their welfare, that this is a place where it's a good place to work. So we're talking about finance, but that this would be true whether you're running a supermarket, a trucking company. If people feel connected to your vision, if they feel that they are loved and cared about, not just as a number, which is sadly often the case, but as an individual, that is going to make a lot of difference, and it's going to be felt in the way that they deal with one another and ultimately with the customer or the client.
Right. Thanks for that, Anne. And one of the questions, and I saw, I think Camille put a comment there about regulations. And whether or not, well, she mentioned it with respect to service standards, but just generally, do we feel that the regulations, or do we have a view on how regulations have evolved? We know there's quite a number of changing regulations in various territories right now. How are regulations evolving that help support the development of the financial sector? And is it heading in the right direction? And maybe Karina, as a regulator, I'll probably put you on the spot to give some thoughts on that.
I believe I heard it mentioned in the last session that, by default, regulation is somewhat reactive. It's very difficult, to anticipate. And it's even more so when it comes to digital finance and, the evolution of technologies. That doesn't mean that we do not have a responsibility to work with our key stakeholders to map out this landscape And ideally, at the end of the day, ensuring that our two major mandates are being met. One is protecting the stability of our financial system. And I think that is an enduring lesson from the global financial crisis, right? Financial stability as one of your North Stars continuously. And it doesn't matter the changes that we're seeing. This is one of the areas that you have to protect. And just as importantly, consumer protection, protection of, vulnerable participants. And I think that with those two North Stars and working with, your stakeholders, this is how you set about mapping, that regulatory landscape. And so again, going back to us here in the ECCU, cryptocurrencies, yeah, the provenance of cryptocurrencies, they're everywhere. We may not understand it. We may not have legitimate channels to access it, but we have persons who are genuinely curious, who are participating at their own risk in cryptocurrencies, and persons who want to venture into this field to offer services. And so one of the responsible actions we had to take quite early in this, as far back as I think 2019, 2020, was to work with our domestic regulators to create avenues for the registration of participating businesses in this area. So we were able to enact across all our 8 member states virtual assets bills, which again, they're not, a wholesale solution to the various risks that cryptocurrencies may potentially pose to consumers and by extension to our financial system. But it's one of the ways that, we can proactively head it off. I say this to say, many times we wring our hands in the face of evolving technologies. Artificial intelligence comes, you have your cryptocurrencies, etc., and we wonder, how do we address them? A couple of things remain the same. What our mandates are. Our mandates are to protect the stability of our financial system. Our region is so vulnerable that this is one of the areas that we can ill afford, to risk. And the other is to protect the vulnerable. There are persons who want to dabble in certain areas, who have the competencies, the understanding, etc. It's not necessarily for them, but to the least, abled in terms of understanding, these intricate new products, etc. That's who we must be focused on when we set about creating that regulatory pathway. So it's not a simple answer, but this is what our major concerns must be.
Thanks. Any thoughts from the others?
I do have the thinking that sometimes it feels as if we are overregulated. But I did make that point earlier that as developing countries, we're held to a really high standard. But the biggest thing I think in terms of service excellence is communication with clients. Because many times people, I hear that with my students sometimes, they'll be blaming the bank or whoever. And I have to explain to them, because I have a little, not insider, but I understand a bit more. It is not the bank, it is a financial requirement for you to need to do these things. So I think that in terms of service excellence, we're not shifting blame, but we have to explain to people why it's important. And it's important because you are protected. And that's a message that's not particularly difficult to get across, because every day people read about fraud and that sort of thing. So if they understand that this is not meant to, send you on wild goose chases, getting lots of information that we're just going to store somewhere. But this means that if somebody tries to hack into your account, we do have information, we're able to safeguard, then that will help. So I really think we have to get better at communicating. And I would also add that we have to get better at communicating in the way that we understand. Sometimes we joke in Jamaica that if you want to hide something, you put it on a notice board, because culturally we're not particularly great at reading. We listen, we hear, we understand. So some companies do a great job of informing, and I see our governments are doing that, as our government in Jamaica is telling people about what the requirement is and why. So we just, as institutions, have to get better at doing that, so people understand the why and not just the what you have to do.
Okay. I see Camille. Camille, you had a question?
Yes, thank you to the panelists. This was a very interesting discussion and presentation. What I have found, however, is that very often banks impose rules and regulations, and I have no lack of understanding about the need for the protections for clients and customers. But when you're going to require a company that is just incorporated, meaning just formed, to present you with a letter of good standing, it is just incorporated. It has to be in good standing, but you're sending the person to pay $3,500 plus the trouble of going to the company's office to get the letter of good standing to open the account. Or when you decide that you are no longer going to do RTGS transactions, and the customers must now do the RTGS transactions themselves, and you have businesses that do many RTGS transactions to a variety of people because that's the nature of their business, but you have just decided that they must now do it themselves. The lack of care for the business of that customer is quite often inexplicable. And I do think that in Jamaica, we're going eventually with the twin peak model. So I do hope that eventually there'll be an avenue where customers can really file their complaints and these can be addressed. And I also wondered about the gray list. Now that Jamaica is off the gray list, are the banks getting together to say to our counterparts abroad, we're off the gray list, we need to ratchet down some of the requirements now that were only there, we were told, because we were on the gray list?
Yeah, thanks for that, Camila. I don't know if Anne, you have an answer to that last question, or it's still a work in progress.
I think you probably can answer that better than me, Dereck, but let me just say that I have to agree with Camille that some of these things are rather arbitrary. And, if you begin with a customer in mind, I think that we would eliminate some of those ideas that seem so good when you're sitting in the boardroom or making policy. And, I'm a small business owner myself, so I can fully identify with the frustration of it at that level. I know at JMB, I think policy is important. So one of the things that we had determined as a company is to have no nuisance fees. So these are the little ways in which, yes, financial institutions can increase their bottom line, but they're just annoying to the customer. And they're like, I have so much money with you, and you're asking me to pay this little bit of money, this little sum, but it's just annoying. So I think making policy decisions and really having the voice of the customer in your head all the time. If I were a customer, how would I feel about this? Now, there are times in which you're going to have to do it, because it may seem like all I'm asking you to do is X, but it may require, a lot of time on the part of someone, and you want to get compensated for that. So again, what I said earlier, talking to the client, and maybe even giving options. If you need this letter for the US Embassy today, that means you're going to have to drop something, so you pay, whatever amount it is. Or if you can wait 3 days, it will be free. This is not a JMB policy, so I'm certainly not putting it out there as anything, but I'm just saying that we have to be creative and think about what you would think if you were a client. And once we do that, I think we'll come up with more sensible ways of doing business.
Yeah, agreed. And just on this specific question, I'm not sure if the movement from the gray list has triggered changes just yet. I think that may take some time to work through. It's a good question that we should probably investigate for future reference. But the Twin Peaks model, what Jamaica is doing is moving to a dual, well, they have two regulators now, but one regulator will focus solely on what we call like the financial supervision of the business, the prudential supervision, which is capital and all the different stability ratios and metrics. And then one regulator will focus purely on consumer protection. So hopefully once that model is, and I know if they're working through it right now to an left the banking sector, they would deepen consultation. So I think they're working through that right now. That should strengthen some of the consumer protection mechanisms that exist in Jamaica. And every country has it in different forms, but the Twin Peaks model really separates it out into two specific roles. One question I had for Michael is mention was made of things like AI and so on prior. Where do you see as a technology, somebody in the technology field, where does AI take us, you know, as a financial sector?
So, yeah, so that's a very good question, Dereck. So there's a lot of benefit to be received from the implementation of AI, and of course, a lot of risks. So it's one of those pervasive technologies that you simply cannot get away from. But I think across the Caribbean, it would really benefit us for us to start to understand it and to start to adopt it in practice and not be afraid. Because a lot of times we tend to be a bit afraid to try these things out, and then we miss the boat, so to speak. And this particular boat is operating like a speedboat. There are challenges that it poses simply because if we look at a lot of the cybersecurity breaches we've seen recently, one of the major reasons why they've been so frequent would be because of the adoption of AI. So the same way, you know, persons may want to use it to improve their business processes, bad actors are using it to quickly find vulnerabilities. And of course, financial services would be a major target. So no longer can we ignore it. I know mention was made earlier about seeing IT as a cost center, but IT is now more and more becoming your first layer of defense against attacks. And, you know, I think it's an issue that has to be, you know, critical focus has to be paid as a region, as a Caribbean on a whole, because we may not necessarily have infrastructure that can compete with a lot of the global players, but we do have techniques that can be implemented to sort of protect us from a lot of the threats that would come from some of the larger countries, right? Something as simple as employing a digital fence. So, and I say that term loosely, but it's really blocking traffic from IPs coming out of Russia, China, unless it's for a specific reason. So there are a lot of low-hanging methods that we could use to really protect ourselves. At the same time, I would say let's not be scared to embrace AI. We've seen the proliferation of tools like ChatGPT, you know, and all these other tools. And what it does, you know, I tell everyone, see these tools as a companion that can boost your productivity. I do not agree that AI is going to come and just take everyone's jobs, but I think it will make us globally, just as people more competitive. So that VLOOKUP that you may have done that would take hours, upload it, and within a few seconds you can have your analysis done. Another major way that it can help to improve how we serve customers would be in terms of spotting patterns, pattern recognition. So when we evaluate particular customers, we can now use AI to really have a better evaluation mechanism for the customers that come to us. So it's not just a broad brush approach. Big data, we speak a lot about big data. AI is very, very beneficial there as well. So a lot of benefits for the financial services sector.
Okay. All right, Kamala, how are we doing for time? Is it time to wrap up now?
Oh, no. We do have some time, and so I would want us to also be able to engage more of the participants in the audience, because I know they didn't have time previously. But something that I wanted to also share as well, Dereck, with respect to this panel. Our societies have changed so much, and today people must have a job. You must have income. You cannot survive without money. A generation ago, you could have. You're part of a larger family, and so you could be taken care of. Not today. Therefore, the financial services sector is critical to people's well-being. And one of the reasons I was so happy that we also had Karina joining us from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is because the way in which the financial services sector is evolving is critical. Ensuring that we move to that digital space so that we could use a lot of the technology in a positive way. But I think Camille also brought out a very important point, and it's one that it's important for us to ensure there's a level of awareness. The impact of some of the decisions from the boardroom onto the average person on the street. Keeping in mind that we cannot survive today if we don't have a proper financial system that allows you access to what little money you have, and to protect it as well. Because all of us today have credit cards. We know what it's like to have to protect that PIN to ensure that your identity, is not easily lost and that kind of thing. Karina, in that move towards creating the digital system that was done, and the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, as you shared with me. So these are very, very, they are not small countries. These are tiny. How exactly did you go about in that project to get persons to, one, be comfortable with moving from the way in which they manage their cash before into this digital space? One, to help people be more comfortable, but two, to raise that awareness, because Dereck, as Camille also mentioned, it should have been at the forefront of the minds of our financial services sector that the impact of being on the gray list was negative, was impacting businesses. And therefore, as soon as you get off that gray list, it should have been the next step. Let's get off those restrictions too, rather than be waiting, to be pushed in that direction. So Karina, what were some of the things that you guys did?
Hey, thank you, Kamala. And just a slight revision. The land masses that we currently occupy, they're small. Not the people, not our heart, not our determination.
Good point.
But with that being said, the Dcash project itself was very much, a learning one, because, and in 2019, when we started to look into this direction with a central bank digital currency, we figured, all of the factors were there. We had a concentrated banking system because we saw the withdrawal from many of the international banks from our local system. We had a decrease in the number of branches. We had what we traditionally had, our geographically separate member states, although we have an organization of Eastern Caribbean states. So we had all of the right factors there. And we, early into this, you're thinking, bring them the technology, they will embrace it, right? But it went beyond that because for us, for instance, Kamala, I think you said, everybody has credit cards. And I think that may be the case in Trinidad. The truth is, various payment tools beyond checks, beyond cash, they're not as widely used and accepted in the ECCU. So for many persons in our 650,000 region, this was their first exposure to an entirely digital payment solution. Yeah. So you could imagine that by the time we got a solution implemented, in the markets and ready to go in their hands, we're then confronted with the fact that, okay, there's a psychological element to this. We're asking here for a change in behavior. We're asking you, instead of dipping your hand in your pocket and taking out, paper, we're asking you to feel confident enough to, one, hold some of your money in a wallet, yeah? And two, to feel confident enough, especially at the height of COVID, to send it remotely to make payments. So we quickly realized that there was a second element. You could build a technology, but in terms of deploying and in terms of penetrating markets and, moving beyond the technical term, getting persons comfortable and accepting of what we're doing, there's still required the human element, yeah? And so what we realized was that we had to deploy teams on the grounds in each of our territories, both for, our technologically savvy financial institutions, our big merchants, etc., as well as for, our ordinary end users, our consumers. So it isn't a one and done deal when you're introducing these types of, major strategic changes. And this is what it is. It requires deliberate planning, but as well as careful execution. And in that execution, although the experience is digital, yeah, the execution has to be human. They have to have a face. They have to understand who is behind this. They have to have trust in the entity behind this. They also have to have a face and some immediate channels to lead them through the process, and a channel that you can turn to for redress when things go wrong. So I say that to say what is a key ingredient in the success of many of these digital initiatives is ensuring that they are readily backed up and recognized by the human touch alongside it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So
excellent point.
yes, thank you. But I wanted, Dereck, if it's okay, because I want to hear Michael's side of it now, which is, so this is, a financial institution that is preparing for major change and how they engage with people. If possible, because I'm not sure, Michael, if you can address this first, but how willing have you found in engaging with the financial institutions now for they to understand the importance of changes to meet the expectation of people? Because we all are understanding that we use our smartphones for so many things, including transactions now. Have you found that the financial institutions are willing to easily and in a very systematic way review their processes to make it more user-friendly and to adopt the technology in order to make people's lives easier?
Yeah, very, very good question. And speaking from the approach we took with our platform, we sought to make the process as simple as possible. And that ties back into understanding who your target market is, who your audience is. A lot of times, we take things and we try to repurpose it for local use, but we don't do it within the context of the Caribbean. So if a product is designed for the traditionally unbanked and underbanked, there may be barriers to understanding. There may be trust factors at play, a degree of fear. There may be a measure of education required to get them to the water before they drink, so to speak. So we've taken all of that into consideration So it's part of the approach we're going to take, but also to make it as simple as possible. The interesting thing is, you know, when I was very young, you know, becoming computer literate was a very big thing. Now there are many people who are not computer literate, but they are mobile literate. And, you know, you use all these complicated mobile applications, right? And you hear about mobile first. What that has done is it's sort of liberalized access. So, you know, if you could use a platform like Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, you could more than likely transact online. Ties back into the trust. Again, we saw, I mean, we could go all the way back to when, you know, ATMs were deployed across Trinidad and Tobago. Took a while before people felt comfortable to put their card in. Now, you know, it's become fairly ubiquitous, right? Similarly with online banking. There's still a lot of people who don't quite feel comfortable to pay their bills online, but once they understand the process, they warm up to a bit, right? So I expect that it will be very similar. It's going to have a significant adoption curve that we have to cater for. But I think, you know, it's the way forward. The Caribbean is practically the last holdout for these types of platforms. You go, you know, we hop on a plane, you travel everywhere else across the world, right? It's Apple Pay, it's Samsung Pay, etc. So, you know, eventually, as much as we have held out, we are going to have to adopt it. I think it just ties back into the trust factor.
Thank you.
If I could just have a word, Kamala. I think that one of the key things for us to do is to not just think about clients or customers en masse, but to recognize that there are segments and to really drill down. So for example, you made an assumption, which I would have made coming from a larger country, everybody has a credit card. That is not true. And even within Jamaica, there are groups upon groups that we have to be concerned about. So for example, for some people, for me in Kingston, the closure of a branch just means a longer trip. For somebody in a rural area, the closure of a branch means something huge for them. So we need to do that. We need to recognize that for people in their teens and 20s, they're the digital nomads. So, you know, everything is very easy for them. For someone who is of another generation, it's not that they cannot learn. As Michael just said, we have evolved, you know, the skepticism about ATMs, we have moved beyond that now. But they have to, we have to understand that we have to speak differently to the target groups. And I don't think that we do a really good job of that. We have one message. So the same way that we segment to market to people, we have to segment to provide them with information that can meet them exactly where they are. And also transition periods, you know, saying that effective tomorrow, this is going to happen, that panics a lot of people, and it creates a barrier between the service institution and the customer.
I understand. Yes, absolutely. Because you do have that range of different needs from different persons depending on where they are. Dereck, I wanted to ask you more so from your work through Chris, as part of the risk management and evaluation of financial services. In that sector, are you finding any common ground as to how organizations are approaching the changes that are required to move into this technology space? Is it that there is a cost concern in one way, which is why the way in which the adoption is taking place in some instances, it's there isn't that human element that allows people the time to get used to new systems. And so it's like you will wake up and overnight it has become, and this was my experience with some of the banks. It's become, we no longer do it this way, you know, have to do it the other way, you know. is there some general thing that you are finding across the financial services sector as to why some of these changes are happening this way?
So I would say, that's a tricky question, right? Because each bank, what happens is that each bank has their own sort of policies in the way they implement things. Some people take a more gradual approach, some people take a more aggressive approach. I think, and some people take an approach, the financial institution is about dollars and cents. Sometimes they take an approach that's purely in the interest of either maximizing revenue or cutting costs, right? And I think, Anne may have alluded to it and some others, that sometimes when you take that approach, yes, we understand what you're trying to do, build efficiency and create a stronger institution and a more profitable institution, but sometimes the expense or the cost of that is a bit of fallout from parts of your client base, right? So I would say based on, how even from working in the banking sector, from being at Chris now, it's hard to say if it's a common theme. What we do, what are your policies? How do you manage your risks in terms of, the cybersecurity and the more financial risks from the credit side? To delve, I don't think we delve that deeply into customer side of it, and that's something maybe somebody from the financial team might be a little bit more aware of. But when we do ratings, we look at an entity and their penetration and so on.
Yeah, at times you were sounding a little bit muffled. Is it me or?
Oh, it might be because of the weather. Sorry.
Yeah,
quality.
I was hearing that too. Not clear.
Yeah.
But I got the
Yeah,
gist.
sorry. So what I was saying is, our focus, are you hearing me back? Yeah, so our focus is more on financial strength. And we do look at things like, how far is your reach, what's your sort of market share and things like that. But to say that, we get into the nitty-gritties of how the institutions deal with their client base and the policies they apply, not specifically, but I could say from just being in the financial sector, there are decisions that are made sometimes that I feel, could be taken a little more gradually. And as you said, some things, sometimes we're in the financial sector, we're okay with increasing things that benefit the bank, but we're much slower in doing things that come back to the customer or benefit the customer, right? So that's something that we need to work on, and and I think, you guys made a great point, and that's what creates, the financial sector as this sort of entity that people don't really like or they don't trust completely. And, I think a lot of work has to go into building that trust so that we can get these new, if they don't trust the simple tools we have now, when we start to get more advanced, that's when you have a problem. And we, as a rating agency, we're going to look at that implementation of how they use technology to help broaden customer base, serve customers, and by extension, improve their credit profile.
Michael, you wanted to add something?
So I do think, I would say, as someone who's been on the outside looking, and yes, at times it can seem harsh. I think the communication at times is where things would fall short. And, a lot of times the public does not quite understand why a decision may have been taken. So I think at times that additional explanation can go a long way. We see it right now with the Forex situation. I myself would have received a notice of a change, which would then impact the way I do business. But I understand at a macro level why the change is being made. For some other people, they think it's just something that is being done to them, and they may not be able to connect the dots. So I think, maybe a change in the style of communication is warranted, especially in these difficult times.
Yeah. And I think it was alluded to earlier, it's more about educating the public about, these are not things that we as a bank or as a financial entity want to do, but we are required to in some cases. But one point I wanted to make before we wrap up is one of the pet peeves that I have is our broad-based adoption of what we call global standards or global practices. And I believe Michael mentioned it, and maybe Anne as well. We're just taking, and I don't mean to knock any regulators or anything, but it's a real pet peeve of mine, and I have this discussion with the regulators. We take on sometimes regulations that are built for big economies, and we just take it wholesale. And we don't really do the work to make sure that it fits within our economies. That's a real pet peeve, but that's something I have seen when I was in banking sector, now even from the other side. And, we look at the regulations and you write in regulations that read it. It doesn't benefit anyone in your country because you've just taken this thing wholesale from Switzerland, wherever it's written, and you're trying to apply it here. I don't know how we solve that problem. It's engagement with the regulators. It's, the players in the market have to continue that engagement through the different associations. But I feel that's something that we really need to critically look at and make sure that when we adopt regulations, yes, we must be in line with global best practices, but also tailor them to make sure that they make.
Okay, we are losing you a little bit again, but I thought that point you just made was really, really very important. That when we adopting regulations, because for sure, especially the EU is far advanced in a lot of the regulations that they're doing with respect to things like data protection and, having to deal with the challenge of the way technology is evolving. So how do we in the region learn from that, but then don't just adopt it wholesale, because our cultures are so different and our people are at different places in their life and how they will respond to some of these. And I think this forum is the type of responses, ensuring that there's an awareness, ensuring that the regulators understand that it's not just a top-down, that what I say goes, but rather it has to be a collaborative approach as to what works best for us. That we all should have the same objective for the outcome, which is a safe society, a well-run society, people feeling that they can access services properly, that their identities can be protected at the same time. So it's a multiple approach that you want to have, but it has to be one that is done with an open mind to hearing the feedback on how it's impacted and agreeing together on what may be the best approach moving forward. And I see Camille has her hand up again, so I would ask her if she wants to unmute and let's hear her contribution as well.
Yes, Kamala, and what you just said, I think is so important, because in reading the Small States Club, what struck me, or one of the things, because so many things struck me, getting the buy-in of the citizenry was at the forefront of all these successful countries. That shared vision, that understanding, and Dereck just alluded to it as well. And I think it's a critical factor in leadership. And that leadership is whether it's a political directorate or the leadership of a business. If you are serving people and you want to retain their custom, then it cannot be just that imposition, which perhaps will positively affect your bottom line, but then that customer gets so upset that they will walk. And then what's the point in spending all these marketing dollars trying to attract new people when the ones you have are leaving you because they're annoyed with how you treat them? Or similarly, with a country, you're going to not retain that political power in this time of quantum politics unless you can say to people, this is why this pain is necessary. This is how we have to proceed with it. Michael alluded to that a while ago when he spoke about the changes that were so necessary with the credit cards, you know, but it's how it's done. And I think as Caribbean people, recognizing, as we've heard today, that it's always about the people when our nations succeed, that we as leaders have to find a way of getting that message through. I just wanted to add that to Wayne on what was being said.
Yes, and this is particularly crucial in the financial services sector because, as you know, we have accepted it is so fundamental to the quality of people's lives. So it needs to work well. But I'm happy that we do have good examples. I love what the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank has been able to achieve. GMMB, I have been totally sold on GMMB since I learned about the bank. You know, they really do live the whole principle of leading with love. And it's nice to interact with all of the persons who were there. So and I like the fact that they are very comfortable. And it was one of the first things that Dereck asked, and you know, to be comfortable as a financial services institution, to say that love is our theme. It's not just the dollars and cents and all of that. So I think that there is a lot for us to celebrate, but certainly there's a lot more that we need to do. And it is going to be fundamental to how it is we are going to progress a really excellent society that's aiming to become really part of that let me say it exactly as President Sarkisian did. You know, we can be small states that are global players, but we need to be very real. We need to be very honest with ourselves. We need to identify our shortcomings, and then we have to put the things in place to fix and execute on that. So Dereck, I want to ask you now to have your panelists give their closing thoughts as we aim to wrap up today's day one of our conference.
Yes, for the questions and contribution. I know my internet is a little iffy right now, so I'll just hand over. Maybe we do it in reverse. We let Michael go first this time, and we do our closing statements. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, so for me, I think broadly, what it boils down to is being competitive. How can we, as you know, the tiny Caribbean, be competitive and, you know, and embracing tools like digital financial services and applications, or embracing AI, they can provide us with that competitive advantage. They do come with their inherent challenges, but the challenges are no different from what every other territory has to surmount. I think it's for us to really embrace it, understand it, and really seek to get the benefits and the competitive advantage that we can from these tools.
Okay, I guess I'm next.
Thanks, yeah, thanks.
Being in the middle, yes. I think that if we adopt the thinking that the customer is the one we're trying to serve, that will help us quite a bit. Nobody is helped when people, as I've heard people say, better I keep my money under the mattress, because they find going through the financial system so tedious, whether they're depositing or taking out, that they don't want to do that. So if we come at it with that in mind, then I think it's going to help us to understand that we have to explain better to them. I think the point that both Dereck and Camille spoke to, we as a region, I think we're still in the baby stage. I feel like sometimes we just say, okay, whatever they say, we're gonna do. And we sign on to all these treaties and regulations, often without thinking what are the implications downstream. I think that Jamaica is what, 63, 64, Trinidad is the same age and so on. We're adults now. So we can afford to not push back and say to hell with you, definitely not. But we can say, can we discuss this? This doesn't fit what we're doing. And if we know our population, we can explain to them why it does not fit. So I think it's time we start doing some of that, because a lot of the requirements are really very onerous. But I guess my summary point would be, let us never lose let us never lose track of the idea that it's really about our clients. If you serve your clients right, the profits are going to follow. If we're nickeling and diming them with the nuisance fees, they're going to go elsewhere or just keep their money under their mattress. So keep the customer in mind and all will be better.
Thank you, and Karina, I'll leave it to you to close up.
Thank you. And just tying back to our original theme, a culture of excellence. I think the call here is that, and I'm speaking here from the seat of a central bank. We must do more than just protecting what we have. We've built some financial systems after many journeys and challenges, and it's deserving of protection. But we also are challenged to go beyond. And listening to my fellow panelists, it is clear that there are a number of areas that we can rise to meet the needs of the people we serve, the businesses we serve better. One of the best approaches to doing so is that approach of disruptive innovation. Doing more, making services more available, more accessible, more affordable. With that approach, twinned with mission-led innovations, you can see, one, the revitalization of our financial services sector, as well as the expansion of the satisfaction and well-being at the end of the day of the people we serve. So we recognize that there is a role for technologies in helping us to meet, maintain, and continue that culture of excellence.
Thank you, Karina, and thank you, panelists, and thank you, Kamala, for having us, and I'll hand back over to you.